The air in the university hall was still heavy, with the scent of ambition and the quiet rustle of research papers, a sanctuary where a brilliant 27-year-old woman stood ready to define her future with a single intellectual question. She was the perfect image of modern success, poised to conquer the world with her mind, until the silence was shattered, not by applause, but by the cold, hard reality of a stare that could dissect a soul. Lee Kuan Yew, the architect of a nation, looked past her accolades, past the years of grueling study, and delivered a verdict that struck with the force of a gavel, telling her that her prestigious degree would never keep her warm at night or carry her name into the next generation. "Don't waste time," he warned, his voice cutting through the academic pretense like a razor, reminding a shocked audience that while she was busy mastering textbooks, her biological clock was ticking down on the one thing a university could never teach her to create. This wasn't just an awkward exchange. It was the sound of a demographic time bomb exploding in real time, a brutal collision between the modern dream of career and the ancient demand for survival, leaving an entire room breathless and forcing a nation to look in the mirror and ask if they had traded their future for a piece of paper. The auditorium lights are blazing, casting a sterile, high-contrast glow over a scene that was supposed to be a routine, intellectual exchange but was about to transform into a legendary ambush of social expectations. Standing at microphone number 3 is the embodiment of the Singaporean dream, a young woman of 27 who has played the game of meritocracy exactly according to the rules written by the very man sitting on the stage. She is not just a student, she is a PhD candidate, the pinnacle of academic discipline, a woman who has sacrificed her 20s to the library, to the lab, and to the pursuit of excellence that the nation demanded of its brightest minds. She grips the microphone, her posture straight, her mind undoubtedly racing with complex policy questions or economic theories she has, prepared to impress the founding father of modern Singapore. She is armored in her intellect, protected by the sanctity of the university hall, where ideas are supposed to matter more than biology, and she waits for the nod to engage in a battle of wits. But Lee Kuan Yew, the man who built a first-world oasis out of a malaria-infested swamp, is not looking at her notes or her academic credentials. He is looking at her timeline. The tension in the room is palpable, a vibrating frequency of reverence and fear, because everyone knows that LKY does not suffer fools. But what happens next is not a critique of her intelligence, but an invasion of her privacy so swift and surgical that it leaves the entire room gasping for air. He bypasses her prepared question entirely, ignoring the script of the academic forum to launch a direct strike at her personal existence with 3 simple words that land like mortar shells. You are 27. It is not a question. It is an indictment. The atmosphere shifts instantly from a lecture to an interrogation, and you can see the visible confusion on her face as the conversation takes a sharp, unscripted turn away from her professional achievement and straight into her bedroom. He asks if she is married, and when she says no, the air leaves the room. He asks if she has a boyfriend, and when the answer is another hesitant negative, the crowd erupts into a laughter that is half amusement and half nervous relief that they are not the ones in the crosshairs. This is the anatomy of a public dismantling, a moment where the modern values of privacy and individual achievement clash violently with the old-world pragmatism of national survival. For the audience, this is high drama, a spectacle of vulnerability where a young woman's romantic life is suddenly the subject of national debate. But for LKY, this is emergency surgery on a dying patient. He looks at her and sees a tragedy unfolding in real time, not because she lacks intelligence, but because she is effectively removing her superior genes from the gene pool with every year she spends chasing a doctorate instead of a husband. The laughter in the hall masks the brutality of the exchange as he calculates the trajectory of her life and realizes she is walking toward a genetic dead end. He presses her on when she will finish her Ph.D., forcing her to admit she will be 29, pushing 30, before she even enters the dating market, a revelation that he meets not with congratulations, but with a look of genuine, terrifying pity. The shock wave of this moment lies in the absolute rejection of the feminist narrative that career conquers all. Here is the most powerful man in the country telling a woman at the height of her intellectual powers that she is making a catastrophic mistake. The audience shifts in their seats, caught between the hilarity of the blunt questioning and the uncomfortable realization that he is saying what no politician in the West would dare to whisper. He is stripping away the prestige of her title, peeling back the layers of her academic success to reveal what he sees as a lonely future, and he does it with a smile that is disarming and devastating in equal measure. This is not just a conversation. It is a collision between the individual's desire for self-actualization and the state's cold demand for continuity, played out in front of cameras, leaving the Ph.D. student standing there, stripped of her armor, realizing that in the eyes of the man who built her world, her greatest achievement is actually her greatest liability. The laughter dies down, but the echo of his advice hangs in the air like smoke, a warning that success has a shelf life and that biology does not negotiate with degrees, leaving the audience electrified by the sheer audacity of a leader who dared to tell a brilliant woman that she was wasting her life by studying too much. To understand the sheer audacity of that moment in the auditorium, you have to surgically open the mind of Lee Kuan Yew and stare directly into the cold, humming machinery of his logic, where the survival of a nation was never about hope or prayers, but about a ruthless, mathematical calculus of human capability. For the architect of modern Singapore, the city-state was not merely a collection of skyscrapers and clean streets, but a living, breathing organism fighting for its life in a hostile neighborhood, a creature whose only natural resource was the gray matter of its population. He looked at his country and saw a terrifying equation where the only way to survive without land, oil, or water was to be smarter, faster, and more efficient than everyone else, meaning that every single human brain was a strategic asset that had to be maximized, harvested, and crucially replicated. When he looked at that doctoral student, he didn't just see a young woman making a personal choice. He saw a catastrophic hemorrhage of the nation's most valuable capital, a genetic bank run where the brightest minds were withdrawing their assets from the future and letting their lineage die out in favor of diplomas that would eventually gather dust. LKY was an unabashed social Darwinist who believed with unwavering conviction that intelligence and talent were not random, accidents of nature, but hereditary traits that had to be passed down like a torch in a storm, and if the bearers of that flame refused to have children, the nation would slowly darken and freeze. This was the heartbeat of his anxiety, a thumping, relentless fear that if the graduate women of Singapore chose careers over cradles, the society would undergo a dysgenic collapse. leaving the island to be inherited by the less capable, essentially reversing the miracle he had spent his life building. He viewed the female PhD not as a triumph of feminism, but as a paradox of progress, where the very education system designed to elevate the nation was simultaneously sterilizing its elite, creating a generation of brilliant, barren leaders who would leave no heirs to carry on the work. To him, that student was a biological dead end, a supreme failure of duty disguised as professional success, because in his brutal worldview, a first-class degree was useless if it didn't produce a first-class family to sustain the civilization. He wasn't trying to be cruel. He was trying to stop a slow-motion suicide of the state, driven by the terrifying data that showed the uneducated were reproducing at double the rate of the educated, a trend he viewed as a cancer on the future of Singapore. The electronic pulse of this problem kept him awake at night, the rhythm of a ticking clock that told him every time a smart woman delayed marriage, the odds of Singapore's survival dropped a fraction of a percentage point. He saw the womb of the intelligent woman as the engine room of the economy, and by staying single, she was effectively shutting down the power grid, an act of negligence he could not forgive and refused to ignore, forcing him to intervene with the desperation of a man watching his life's work vanish into the void of childlessness. The moment in the auditorium was not a random slip of the tongue or the ramblings of an old man losing his filter. It was a calculated echo of a massive cultural earthquake that Lee Kuan Yew had triggered decades earlier, specifically on a sweltering night in August 1983 during his National Day rally speech, where he decided to set fire to the polite sensibilities of his electorate. He stood before the nation and effectively told them that their private choices were leading to a national catastrophe, unleashing a barrage of statistics that painted a terrifying picture of a society consuming its own future. This was the night the great marriage debate exploded, as LKY dropped a nuclear payload of hard truths onto the public, declaring with icy precision that if the graduates of Singapore did not marry each other and reproduce, the country's talent pool would drain away within a single generation, leaving behind a society incapable of maintaining the first world standards they had fought so hard to build. He didn't mince words, arguing that while the men of Singapore were marrying downwards, choosing wives with less education, the brilliant women were being left on the shelf, creating a lopsided demographic pyramid that he viewed as nothing short of genetic suicide. It was a speech that shattered the boundary between the bedroom and the state, transforming romance into a matter of national security. But words were not enough for the pragmatic architect. He needed machinery, and so the government did the unthinkable by operationalizing love through the creation of the Social Development Unit, the SDU. It was a bureaucratically named agency with a radical mission to act as the official state Cupid for the intelligentsia, a government-funded dating service designed to herd university graduates into the same rooms, onto the same love boat cruises, and into the same tea dances in the desperate hope that biology would take over. The SDU was social engineering on a level that would make Orwell blush, a frantic attempt to curate the bloodlines of the nation by ensuring that boy doctor met girl lawyer, turning the chaotic, mysterious force of attraction into a KPI that could be measured, tracked and optimized by civil servants who were now responsible for the nation's libido. The backlash was immediate, visceral, and furious. The women of Singapore, particularly the very graduates he was trying to woo, felt insulted. reduced to nothing more than bread mares for the state's GDP, while the broader public mocked the SDU as the single, desperate and ugly unit, rejecting the idea that the government had any business telling them who to love. The press went wild. Letters poured in, and for a moment it seemed like the great leader had finally miscalculated, alienating the very middle class he had created. Yet, in the face of this tidal wave of resentment, Lee Kuan Yew did not blink, did not apologize, and did not retreat 1 inch. He stood in the storm of criticism with the stoic resolve of a man who believed that being right was infinitely more important than being popular, convinced that 50 years down the line, when Singapore was still thriving because of his intervention, history would absolve him of his rudeness. He viewed the anger of the populace as the tantrum of a child refusing medicine. He knew it tasted bitter, but he was absolutely certain that without it, the patient would die, and so the policy remained, a testament to his unwavering belief that the survival of the tribe trumped the feelings of the individual every single time. To understand the crushing weight of that moment, we must first humanize the woman standing at microphone number 3, stripping away the anonymity of the crowd to reveal the exhausting, solitary climb she endured to get there, a journey defined by the relentless pressure of an Asian education system that demands perfection as the baseline for existence. She is not merely a student. She is a survivor of a brutal meritocratic gladiator pit, a woman who spent her 20s in a state of suspended animation, trading sleep, social connection, and romance for the cold comfort of library stacks and peer-reviewed validation, believing the promise that if she just worked hard enough, the world would be hers. But the cruel irony, the trap that Lee Kuan Yew saw with such terrifying clarity, is that the very ambition that propelled her to the top of the ivory tower was simultaneously digging a grave for her biological lineage. This is the great paradox of modern success in East Asia, a region that worships education with religious fervor, yet fails to reconcile the demands of the modern economy with the unforgiving, ancient reality of human biology. The tragedy lies in the math, a cold calculation of opportunity cost, where every year invested in a thesis is a year withdrawn from the finite account of fertility, creating a zero-sum game between the brain and the womb that no amount of feminism or policy can rewrite. Sociologists call this the ambition trap, a phenomenon where the most capable women are funneled into a tunnel of high achievement that spits them out on the other side of 30, successful but suddenly scrambling against a biological clock that does not care about their GPA. The doctoral student stands there as a symbol of a generation that was told they could have it all, only to discover that the timeline for professional mastery overlaps almost perfectly with the window of peak fertility, forcing a choice that feels less like liberation and more like an amputation. She is the face of the demographic winter, a chilling term used by experts to describe the slow, silent extinction of high IQ populations who have become too busy, too tired, or too educated to reproduce, creating a society of childless kings and queens ruling over empty nurseries. While LKY's delivery was blunt enough to bruise, the uncomfortable truth vibrating beneath his words is that a PhD can be obtained at 50, but a family cannot be easily started at 40. A biological asymmetry that modern society desperately tries to ignore, but which nature enforces with ruthless consistency. He wasn't just mocking her single status. He was exposing the lie that career and family are easily interchangeable blocks in a life plan. forcing the audience to confront the reality that for a woman in her position, the delay is not just a pause, it is often a permanent cancellation. The tension in that room stems from the collision of two valid worlds, the modern world where she is a brilliant scholar deserving of respect, and the primal world where she is a biological entity running out of time. By prioritizing the former so heavily, she inadvertently becomes a statistic in the very crisis L.K. Why spent his life fighting, leaving us to wonder if the pursuit of the highest degree is worth the price of the deepest. Silence that follows when the applause finally stops. Decades have passed since that uncomfortable interrogation in the auditorium, and if you walk through the gleaming, futuristic streets of modern Singapore today, past the gravity-defying architecture of Marina Bay Sands and the manicured perfection of the gardens by the bay, you are witnessing the wealthiest, most efficient, and most orderly society human civilization has ever produced. Yet if you listen closely, beneath the hum of commerce and the roar of supercars, you will hear the deafening sound of Lee Kuan Yew's nightmare coming true. The silence is not in the libraries or the boardrooms, but in the playgrounds and the nurseries, a terrifying quiet that hangs over the nation like a shroud, because the specific warning he gave to that one student was ignored by an entire generation, leading to a demographic collapse so severe that it threatens to erase the very people who built this utopia. The statistics are no longer just worrying. They are catastrophic, a mathematical horror story where the fertility rate has plummeted well below the replacement level of 2.1, crashing through the floor to hover around a suicidal 0.97. Meaning that the native population is mathematically halving with every passing generation, a slow-motion extinction event that no amount of GDP growth can hide. The tragedy of this modern silence is that the government, inheriting LKY's panic, has tried to fight this fire with a tsunami of cash, throwing billions of dollars at young couples in the form of baby bonuses, housing grants, and extended parental leave, effectively trying to bribe its citizens into reproduction. Yet these policies have crashed against the seawall of modern culture, failing spectacularly because the government is trying to solve a spiritual and biological problem with a calculator, unable to grasp that for the hyper-educated, hyper-competitive women of Singapore, the price of a child is not measured in dollars, but in the loss of freedom, sleep, and career trajectory. The state acts like a desperate suitor, offering gifts to a populace that has simply lost the appetite for the chaos of family life, preferring the predictable satisfaction of a career or the freedom of travel, proving that once a society crosses a certain threshold of affluence and education, the instinct to reproduce is smothered by the comfort of the status quo. This is the silver tsunami crashing down on the island, a future where geriatric care centers outnumber kindergartens, and where the economy is increasingly powered by a transient workforce of immigrants, because the locals are too old to work and too few to sustain the grid. It forces us to look back at the old man in the auditorium, not as a rude intruder, but as a prophet of doom who saw the iceberg before the ship even left the harbor, realizing that his brusque interrogation wasn't an act of malice, but a desperate, final attempt to wake up a sleepwalking elite. The question of whether he was right to be so direct is no longer a philosophical debate, but a historical verdict written in the empty maternity wards of the city. He was tactless, he was invasive, and he was offensive, but he was also absolutely, terrifyingly correct. The Ph.D. student and her peers won the argument that day, asserting their right to choose their own path, but in doing so, they may have lost the future, leaving Singapore as a glittering, gold-plated retirement home, a testament to the brutal truth that a nation can win every economic battle and still lose the war for survival if it forgets that its most important product is not a semiconductor, but a child. In the dying seconds of that viral clip, the camera lingers on the student's face, capturing a smile that is one of the most enigmatic and culturally complex expressions in modern history, a polite, terrified mask of compliance that hides a burning, silent rebellion. She nods, she laughs along with the crowd, and she accepts the elder statesman's advice with the grace expected of a well-raised Singaporean daughter. But in her eyes you can see the steel doors of her mind slamming shut against him. That smile is not an admission of defeat. It is a shield, a mechanism of social survival that allowed her to endure the public dissection of her womanhood while internally doubling down on the very ambition he sought to dismantle. She left that auditorium not to find a husband to finish her thesis, fueled perhaps by the indignation of being reduced to a biological asset, driven by the modern individualistic creed that says a woman's worth is determined by what she achieves, not who she mothers. She won the argument in the court of public opinion, where individual liberty is the highest god, and she likely went on to secure that doctorate, framing the parchment as a symbol of her victory over the patriarchy and the state, a testament to her refusal to be just another brick in the wall of national demographics. But as we zoom out from the heat of that moment and project her timeline forward into the twilight of life, the moral calculus begins to shift in terrifying ways, forcing us to confront the brutal philosophy of the satisfying life that Lee Kuan Yew was desperately trying to articulate. He wasn't talking about the dopamine hit of graduation day or the fleeting pride of a promotion. He was talking about the deathbed test, the cold, quiet hour at the end of the road when the accolades have faded and the applause has long since stopped. In that final accounting, the human heart rarely yearns for the cold glass of a trophy or the paper texture of a diploma. It yearns for the hand of a child, the chaotic noise of a family dinner, the visceral, messy, immortal connection of blood and legacy that anchors a person to the earth. The tragedy that LKY foresaw was a generation of brilliant people waking up in pristine, empty apartments at the age of 80, surrounded by framed degrees that cannot love them back, realizing too late that they traded the only form of immortality available to us, our descendants, for a career that replaced them the moment they retired. This brings us full circle back to the hushed, sacred silence of the library where our story began, but the silence now feels different. It is no longer the peaceful quiet of concentration, but the sterile, heavy stillness of a tomb. The books are still there, the knowledge is preserved, and the air is conditioned to a perfect preservational chill, but there is a haunting absence of life, a void where the next generation should be. The student standing at the microphone made a choice that defined the 21st century, prioritizing the sovereignty of the self over the survival of the tribe, a choice that gave her freedom but cost her nation its heartbeat. She walked out of that hall and undoubtedly succeeded, climbing the ladder of meritocracy to its very peak, proving the old man wrong in the short term. But as the lights dim on the grand experiment of Singapore, the echo of his warning rings louder than ever, a ghost story for the modern age. We are left staring at the dust motes dancing in the library light, realizing that in the grand, ruthless game of history, victory is not measured by the titles before your name, but by the life you leave behind. She earned the title of doctor, but Singapore lost the future.